Today, we're diving into the dark, twisted, and downright cringe-worthy punishments of the medieval era. Get ready to laugh, gasp, and maybe even be thankful you live in the 21st century. Number 1. The Iron Maiden. Not just a heavy metal band. Picture this, a big, metal coffin with spikes inside. No, it's not a medieval chiropractor's office. The Iron Maiden was used to impale unlucky souls, making it the world's worst hug machine. Imagine getting a hug from that at your family reunion. The Iron Maiden wasn't just a terrifying piece of furniture. It was a psychological nightmare. Victims were often shown the device before their execution, just to get that adrenaline pumping. Because what's scarier than a preview of your own demise? The spikes inside were strategically placed to miss vital organs, prolonging the agony. It's like medieval doctors moonlighted as torture device designers. Talk about a side hustle. Legend has it, the first Iron Maiden was used in Nuremberg in the 16th century, just when you thought Oktoberfest was the wildest thing to come out of Germany. Despite popular belief, historians argue whether the Iron Maiden was actually used during medieval times or later. It's like finding out your favorite horror movie was based on a true story, or not. The device was often decorated with religious imagery because nothing says divine punishment like a metal death box. Medieval art was seriously next level. Victims were often left to die slowly, their screams echoing through the night. This must have been the medieval equivalent of blasting death metal music at your neighbors. The fear of the Iron Maiden was so intense, it was often enough to extract confessions. Talk about peer pressure, just medieval style. Despite its gruesome nature, the Iron Maiden is now a popular exhibit in museums. People love a good scare, even when it's centuries old. The original horror show. While the Iron Maiden's true usage is debated, its legend remains. It's like the medieval version of an urban myth, only with a lot more spikes. Number 2. The rack. Stretching the truth and your limbs. If you ever wished you were a bit taller, the medieval rack might have granted your wish, in the most excruciating way possible. It's the world's least enjoyable stretching exercise. The rack was essentially a big, wooden frame with rollers at each end. Victims were tied to the rollers and then stretched until their joints dislocated. Chiropractors today would be horrified. This device was popular in the Tower of London, where it was used to extract confessions. Nothing says, spill the beans, like a few extra inches on your height. Famous victims included Guy Fawkes, who was racked after the failed gunpowder plot. Remember, the 5th of November, and the excruciating back pain. The rack didn't just stretch limbs, it also caused muscle spasms, torn ligaments, and broken bones. It's like a medieval full-body workout, just way more painful. The sight of the rack was often enough to make people confess to anything. It's like getting a speeding ticket and admitting to stealing the Mona Lisa. The rack's use declined in the 17th century, possibly because even executioners were like, dude, this is too much. Despite its grim purpose, replicas of the rack are popular attractions in torture museums. Because nothing says family fun like medieval torture devices. The rack's legacy lives on in our language. Ever heard the phrase rack your brain? Now you know its terrifying origins. Suddenly, crossword puzzles seem less stressful. The rack reminds us that medieval justice was as flexible as the victim's limbs, literally. It's a spine-chilling reminder of how far we've come in terms of human rights. No more extreme stretching sessions, thankfully. Number 3. Scold's bridle, muzzle for medieval motor mouths. Ever told someone to put a sock in it? In medieval times, they had something far worse, the scold's bridle. This metal muzzle was a nightmare for nagging wives and gossipy neighbors. Muzzle up. The scold's bridle had a bit that went into the mouth, often spiked, to prevent talking. It's like a medieval gag order with a side of oral torture. The device was usually made of iron and locked onto the victim's head. Talk about a bad hair day. Iron helmet, anyone? Women accused of being scolds, or nags, were forced to wear the bridle as punishment. It's like medieval anti-nag technology. Wives everywhere, beware. The scold's bridle was sometimes decorated with bells to draw attention to the victim. Because nothing says shame, like jingling down the street. This punishment wasn't just about silence. It was public humiliation. Victims were paraded around town, ensuring everyone knew who the local chatterbox was. The scold's bridle was a favorite in Scotland and England. Turns out, they were serious about keeping the peace and the quiet. The device could cause severe injury, including tongue lacerations and broken teeth. It's like a visit to the dentist, medieval style, without the numbing agents. Some bridles had a mask with grotesque features to further humiliate the wearer. It's like the medieval version of Snapchat filters, but way less fun. The use of the scold's bridle declined in the 18th century, but its legacy lives on. Next time someone tells you to shut up, just be glad they don't have an iron muzzle handy. Number 4. The breaking wheel. Taking torture for a spin. Imagine a giant wheel, but instead of fun carnival rides, it's used to break your bones. The breaking wheel is the medieval version of a really bad spin class. Victims were tied to the wheel, and executioners used clubs to break their limbs. It's like a medieval version of piñata, but with a lot more screaming and no candy. The broken limbs were then threaded through the spokes, leaving the victim in a grotesque display. It's the ultimate twisted punishment. This device was known in Germany as the Catherine wheel, but trust me, it was far from saintly. If you thought German engineering was impressive, wait till you see their medieval torture devices. The breaking wheel was a public spectacle, drawing large crowds. It was the medieval equivalent of binge-watching a horror series, gruesome, yet captivating. Victims often lingered for days, exposed to the elements and birds. Forget bed sores, this was the medieval version of extreme camping. The wheel was also a form of humiliation, as broken victims were left on display. It's like the ultimate walk of shame. If you could still walk, that is. Sometimes the wheel was raised on a pole, making the victim a horrifying roadside attraction. It's the original look at me moment, just far less Instagram-worthy. The breaking wheel was used for severe crimes, like murder and treason. Because, just a regular slap on the wrist wouldn't cut it for those offenses. This punishment fell out of favor by the 18th century, but its legacy is a reminder. Sometimes, history is a real pain in the neck, and every other bone in your body. Number 5. The pillory, medieval public shaming. Ever feel embarrassed when someone posts a bad photo of you online? Medieval folks had the pillory, a wooden frame that locked your head and hands in place for all to see. Talk about a bad profile pic. Victims were left in the town square, subjected to public mockery and pelting with rotten food. It's like getting a million dislikes on social media, but with added bruises. The pillory was often used for minor crimes like theft and slander. It's the medieval equivalent of getting grounded, just way more public and humiliating. Some victims were left in the pillory for days, exposed to the elements. Sunburn and frostbite were the least of their worries. The public was encouraged to participate in the shaming. It's like medieval reality TV. Everyone gets to be Simon Cowell, but with vegetables. The pillory's design varied, but the concept was universal: public humiliation. It's like the original town square Twitter. Famous users of the pillory included Daniel Defoe, author of Robinson Crusoe, who was punished for his political writings. Even writers couldn't escape bad reviews back then. The pillory could also be lethal, as mobs sometimes got too enthusiastic. Who knew Rotten Tomatoes could be so deadly? Despite its brutality, the pillory was considered a more lenient punishment compared to others. Because, sometimes just being mocked is a relief. The pillory was abolished in England in 1837, marking the end of public shaming as punishment. Now we just use the internet for that. Number 6. Ducking stool. Taking a dip for justice. Imagine being tied to a chair and dunked into a river repeatedly. No, it's not a weird water park ride. It's the ducking stool, a punishment for so-called witches and scolds. The victim was strapped to a chair mounted on a long wooden beam and dunked into the water. It's the medieval version of waterboarding, with a splash of public spectacle. Ducking was used to determine if a woman was a witch. If she floated, she was guilty. If she sank, she was innocent but, drowned. Talk about a lose-lose situation. This punishment was popular in England and colonial America, where witch hysteria ran rampant. Who knew Halloween could be so deadly? Ducking was as much about humiliation as it was about punishment. It's like the medieval equivalent of a viral fail video, but with much higher stakes. The ducking stool was used primarily on women, reinforcing sexist notions of the time. Because who needs gender equality when you've got a river and a chair? The practice often resulted in serious injury or death, as drowning was a common outcome. Forget lifeguards. These guys needed a miracle. Public duckings drew large crowds, eager to watch the spectacle. It's like medieval Netflix, but with real-life horror. The ducking stool fell out of use in the 18th century, but its legacy lives on in ghost stories and folklore. Next time you see a spooky river, just be glad there's no chair waiting for you. Today, the ducking stool is a reminder of how fear and superstition once ruled justice. Thank goodness we've traded in river dunkings for actual courtrooms. Number 7. The Spanish donkey, a painful ride. The Spanish donkey sounds like a fun party game, but it's actually a torture device designed to split you in half. Literally. Victims were made to straddle a wooden donkey with a sharp, triangular back. We're talking the worst saddle sores imaginable. Weights were added to the victim's feet to increase pressure. It's like a medieval leg day at the gym, but way more painful. This punishment was used for both men and women, proving that pain was indeed an equal opportunity employer. The Spanish donkey was designed to cause excruciating pain without immediate death. It's like a slow cooker for torture. Set it and forget it, but with more screams. The device was used during the Spanish Inquisition, a period known for its inventive cruelty. Monty Python wasn't kidding when they said no one expects the Spanish Inquisition. Victims often passed out from the pain, only to be revived and placed back on the donkey. It's the medieval version of the worst theme park ride ever. No fun and endless suffering. The Spanish donkey was sometimes called the wooden horse, but this ride was far from a fairy tale. Think more nightmare than Disney magic. This device left permanent damage, often causing splits and severe internal injuries. It's like the worst horseback riding accident you can imagine, but on purpose. While the Spanish donkey fell out of use, its terrifying reputation endures. Next time you see a donkey, just be glad it's not made of wood and spikes. Number 8. Saw torture. Split decisions. Picture this: being hung upside down and sawed in half. No, it's not a magic trick gone wrong. It's saw torture, a medieval nightmare. Victims were tied upside down to prolong blood flow to the brain, ensuring they stayed conscious longer. It's the worst kind of head rush you can imagine. The saw was usually a large, two-handled one, and the process was slow. It's like a really bad DIY project, except you're the project. Sawing often started at the groin and worked its way down. This gives new meaning to the phrase, splitting headache. This form of torture was used to punish a variety of crimes, from theft to heresy. Because apparently, medieval folks thought a regular jail sentence was too boring. The upside-down position wasn't just for blood flow. It also added to the humiliation. It's like being shamed and tortured all at once. Witnesses were often brought to watch, adding to the horror. It's like a public execution, but with an extra dose of medieval theater. The saw was sometimes heated to increase agony. Because regular sawing wasn't cruel enough, apparently, saw torture was prevalent in various parts of Europe and Asia. It seems no continent was safe from this gruesome invention. Thankfully, this brutal punishment faded away, but its horror lives on in stories and nightmares. Modern-day saws should only be used for woodwork, not for people. Number 9. The pear of anguish, a medieval mouthful. The pear of anguish sounds like a medieval fruit, but it's actually a device designed to rip you apart from the inside. Delicious, right? This metal device was inserted into the victim's mouth, rectum, or vagina, and then expanded. It's the medieval version of a very invasive dental exam, or worse. The pear had 4 segments that spread apart when the screw at the top was turned. Talk about a device that's far from user-friendly. This torture was often reserved for liars, blasphemers, and homosexuals. Because medieval punishments had to be as discriminatory as they were brutal. The pear of anguish could cause severe internal damage, often leading to death. It's like the worst cavity filling, but for your entire body. This device was sometimes heated before insertion, adding a layer of unbearable pain. It's like combining fire and brimstone with a visit to the doctor. The pear was a favorite tool during the Inquisition. Because if there's one thing the Inquisition loved, it was making people scream in agony. There's little evidence the pear was widely used, but its terrifying design has cemented its place in torture lore. It's the stuff of medieval horror stories. While the pear of anguish might sound like a bad fairy tale, it's a stark reminder of the cruelty humans are capable of. Fairy tales never looked so appealing. Today, the pear of anguish is more of a museum curiosity than a real threat. And thank goodness for that. Modern dentistry is scary enough. Number 10. The heretic's fork, a pain in the neck. The heretic's fork is a small, two-pronged device placed between the sternum and chin, forcing the victim to keep their head up. It's like a medieval posture corrector from hell. This fork didn't pierce deeply, but prevented the victim from speaking or moving their head. It's like being stuck in the world's worst neck brace. The fork was often engraved with the word, "aburo," I recant, emphasizing the victim's forced confession. Because nothing says, sorry, like a metal prong in your throat. Used mainly during the Inquisition, the heretic's fork was designed to extract confessions. It's like a medieval lie detector, but with more blood. Victims were often left in this device for days, unable to sleep. Imagine the worst case of insomnia, multiplied by 1,000. The fork caused minimal physical damage, but maximum psychological torment. It's the ultimate mind game with a side of neck pain. This punishment was public, adding humiliation to the mix. It's like being shamed and silenced in front of everyone you know. Despite its simplicity, the heretic's fork was incredibly effective. It's proof that sometimes the smallest tools can be the most terrifying. The heretic's fork fell out of use with the end of the Inquisition, but its memory lingers. Modern neck pain seems trivial in comparison. This device reminds us that medieval justice was as much about mental torment as physical pain. Next time you're stuck in traffic, just be glad there's no fork involved.